we all know what happens when holidays happen and you have families close by. And that's what got us talking, is one of the conflict situations that we often face is when families get together. And both Vicky and I were wondering, why was that? Because it's supposed to be a reasonably happy space, right? Getting together, having good food. And I think one of the things is that it's a very emotional space, because emotions are high. You're not guarded. You're not in a professional sense guarded, and that's where uh, things can emerge that can hurt each other, or can be unintentional, but people then can not see beyond that. So that was one angle. And then Vicky started saying it must be the same in the workplace, right, Vicky?
Yeah. We talked about how, we probably just finished up a lot of businesses. If you work on the calendar year, you probably just finished up some budgeting, or you're deep into it, which is sort of stressful. And I know here in the US, there's a lot of a push that comes leading up to, say, Thanksgiving timeframe, which I know is not celebrated everywhere in the world. But towards the end of November here in the US, there's sort of a shutdown that sort of starts to happen after that, through the new year. And so there's a lot of pressure to get projects in, or people have to get like their annual reviews where they get or receive that feedback that might dictate about whether they get promotions, or whether they get bonuses, or whether they get put on a PIP, the performance improvement plan, whether they're in trouble. And so there's a lot of pressure on those kind of pieces, and an opportunity, looking for opportunities to shine too. But there seems to be sort of this hurry up and rush thing that happens in that world. I'm curious if that's something that has played out for any of you guys here. For me, a lot of it's about expectation management. And so I know that'll be a topic we'll be getting into. But did I hit it right in our professional lives and in the business world? Is there a lot of pressures or things that emerge at the end of the year?
Well, Vicky, if I could take what both you and Kavita said, I think there's expectations. I think there is history. Okay, so there are things that went on in the past. Uncle Ned, whatever, or George, whatever, on the project. And I also think there's the need to simplify when we think about people, without recognizing always the breadth of the human being we're dealing with. Just because, when I'm at work, if I'm dealing with a payments clerk, I really don't need to know his whole life story, but I may catch him on a bad day when, a child is sick or something else like that. And if we knew everything about everyone, there are two big mistakes if you listen to business bunko. One is you need to have the big picture, and the other is you really need to understand the other person. Well, number one, no, you don't. I don't want the pilot of my plane worrying about the big picture for American Airlines. I want him putting the plane down safely, please. That's just fine by me. The big picture can wait for somebody else. But secondly, if I invested the time to understand everyone's personal life circumstances, I would never get anything done. So we by necessity simplify, and that can lead to those mismatched expectations that I know, Vicky, you have talked about so eloquently. Personal story. In my early consulting career, when I started with McKinsey back in the 80s, we were working with a client, and I'm just going to call him WW. And WW was assigned to my team. I wasn't quite a manager yet, and he was supposed to be helping us with some very important parts of the project. And we made commitments based on his engagement. He was a senior engineer. He was an important person at this company. And he was a constant source of frustration. And we would talk as a team in the evenings in typical McKinsey fashion about how annoying and just these people just didn't work hard and everything. Couldn't say more bad. Then I find out later as I'm getting to know him, he's been dealing with a wife at home who's suffering from MS and going through serious episodes. And he is trying to raise 3 children, help a wife with MS and everything else like that. And it put things in a very different context. And you'd like to say, well, gee, Nick, you should have known that. But is that really true? Do we have the capacity to know other people at that level of, so I think it ends up being something about elbow room around expectations. And I'm not even going to take the invitation to go down the road of family.
We'll get there later, maybe.
Issues.
So what I heard you say in that is, it's certainly about expectation management, and to to recognize that you don't know everything about what's going on in other people's world. So the idea of not making assumptions, and what we talk about a lot in our classes is this concept of staying curious. When there's a conflict or some kind of negativity that is emerging, staying curious instead of making an assumption about, what's kind of going on. So from a workplace standpoint, certainly working with people who may not be managing their stress very well. I think there's a certain amount of avoidance that happens perhaps too, that people either want to avoid conflict or want to avoid getting more responsibilities.
There's another
Vicki,
thing, though.
Can I just, I'm saying something. I'm suggesting a Heisenberg's uncertainty principle of human interaction, because
Okay, folks,
I think it would have been unfair to say, Nick, you should have known that about this guy. And I don't think I made a mistake. I think there are limitations to how much we can know about a situation. There's a wonderful book out there called The Spirituality of Imperfection. The fact is, we're human in a finite world. And so, yes, we need to do certain things to avoid that. But should I have inquired from this guy about his life circumstances so I could better understand it? I don't think you can make that case, because there were probably 10 people I was working with at that client. So I'm suggesting maybe it's in the execution rather than the, I don't think we should set an ideal that is unrealistic, because I don't think that's helpful to people in practical.
That is, I'm with you there. I do think the recognition of the fact that your bandwidth is short can help you with some perspectives in terms of adjusting your expectations, perhaps.
Yeah, I am going to make mistakes, as are you. And how do we work in an environment where we know that's going to happen?
Yeah.
Trying to prevent people from killing each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or even a few steps down from, homicide. Are there other issues like at work that kind of come up this end of the year, into the season? I know for a lot of folks, they work on a different fiscal calendar, where it ends in July or whatever. But are there other things that this time of year I missed relative to work stressors?
It wasn't so specific to the end of year. It's more current context, certainly in New Zealand. It's been pretty recessionary in the marketplace for a good period of time now, which has created a lot of impact. So not only do you have projects and programs of work, you've got major transformation happening in organizations trying to pivot to survive, and folks that are being restructured in the labor market that's pretty challenging. So there's some quite high risk consequences to the environments people are in that I'm sensing from leaders I'm working with is taking them below the line. They're quite fearful, they're quite concerned, and they're pretty exhausted from already a tough year. And that's kind of a lot that they're trying to manage and navigate, which makes it harder to manage the day-to-day emotional stresses and triggers that otherwise you might be very comfortable to manage.
Excellent point.
I jumped straight across you by accident. Sorry.
It's okay. You're right. I think
Helen.
Also in New Zealand, totally reiterate what Mark has said. Another trend, probably because of the different fiscal years and different timing of summer holidays, for example, here. Certainly in December, and I think I'm noticing it even earlier this year, people kind of give up or close down. So rather than ramping up activity, they're already mentally on holiday. Often. So if there's some urgency around something, it can be quite hard to get people engaged and rally, if you like, enough energy to push things through it at this time of the year.
Okay, that's a really great point. And I think about what you just said, the idea of managing through where other people are at in different places. I look at students that I'm working with the last, by high school and through college and university years, these last weeks of school is incredibly stressful for them with finals and papers, and maybe they procrastinated or maybe not, right? There's lots of, intense things, and that matters. And then you're right, with people getting ready to mentally and emotionally check out because they're about to take several weeks off. That makes a lot of sense.
I've got a couple of comments in the chat. Deepika says lots of students dealing with anxiety, with changing skill requirements, implications of AI, trying to enter the job market. And from Mark, or prioritize urgency, focus on key initiatives internally, meaning reduce scope. So anything that's non-critical gets delayed or dropped, as Helen said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's,
sure. I was thinking we should probably just do another round of what are some of these situations, but then it'll be really useful to step into what do we
What
know?
do we do?
Yeah, what do we do? What do we know? How have you dealt with some of the situations? So, anyone else wants to bring up any other kind of topics or anything else they have observed?
I think just listening to what everyone said, and I think you guys have done a great job setting the stage, is I'm hearing a lot of like the priority dance at the end of the year, whether that be at work or other places. You have, fiscal responsibilities, whether you have an open role that you need to fill by the end of the year, or you have to do budget planning for 2026, or someone else maybe is higher up in the company and has that bigger picture view, and then someone lower in the company might have a tier 1 priority for them, but it doesn't even make someone that's higher up in the company's bottom of their list. So I'm hearing a lot of like priority dancing based off different factors that could even also stem into people's personal lives. When the holidays are coming up, you have your kids maybe more at home and stuff like that may affect work.
Yeah, you sort of bring up that merging of home and personal life, right? I feel like as the holidays are approaching the end of the year, there's a lot more of those things merging together. And again, with that come expectation management and pressures that in my world, in my clinical practice, I talk about how some of these pressures and expectations, we have to take a step back and like, are they internally imposed? Are they your expectations, but maybe not other people's expectation? And so we do a lot of sort of introspection, checking in, on some of those pieces. But from the workplace, standpoint, I think, Jake, you brought up a great point in terms of prioritization. And someone mentioned in chat, I'm sorry, I missed who it was, that sort of like urgency, or people just not making commitments. Not following through or not willing to lean in and make a commitment to something. And so in my world, a lot of things get put on pause. They start talking about, all right, well, we'll pick this back up in the new year. And I'm like, it's like the second week of November. Like we still got like 6-7 weeks left here, people. But they're talking, we'll pick this up, at the start of the year, which having to accept what's in your control and what isn't is a big part of what we talk about when learning to manage a lot of these big stressors. And having people to appropriately either bounce ideas off with or share with. So those were some great ideas.
Speaking of the prioritization dance, the other thing, the exact opposite also happens. For some reason, the end of the year is seen as the end of a race. And so people want things done just before, even though you still have a lot of time afterwards. So there is that aspect of it as well. But I want to go back to, I think, Nick, you said about history, especially when it comes to families or friends getting together and history. What is it about history and unspoken irritations, perhaps, that makes it really ripe?
Well, I mean, my thoughts and others can pitch in. So first of all, we are all accountants, and getting even is as human as, you talk about fearlessly human again. Getting even is something we all look to do. And it's really difficult to suppress, especially if you feel you've been had or one-upped. I'm not even going to mention the role in family side of alcohol. But you can think about alcohol as a distortion or amplifier. And you see the same things in a workplace, even when someone isn't drinking at work. But there's still, as you pointed out, some of these other stressors lead someone to behave uncharacteristically badly. And sometimes we even behave badly. I know I do. I'm not going to say we. Let me be very personal. Sometimes I behave badly and know I'm doing it, and just can't or don't or aren't willing to stop myself. And I've taken to changing my behavior at some family events for that reason. And there are people I avoid for that reason, because I'm a conflict avoider, so I tend to avoid it. But I mean, history is just, I remember when. My wife says she's got Irish amnesia. She forgives but doesn't forget. So I'm sure someone was offended by that, but I'll live with it too. Sort of, yeah. I'm an equal opportunity offender.
Terry, you were mentioning earlier about kind of coaching That was something that you've grown to really enjoy, kind of like mentoring. Have you had to kind of help people through maybe earlier career? And I don't know if that was more in the engineering realm, or others where you've had to coach them through some potential conflict, how to bring it up or how to address it. Is that something you've experienced?
Probably not so much, actually. No. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, actually. And we had a couple of good comments in here. I want to read the people not making choices in those parts, but also talking about the shared history that we have, but also that involves a lot of unresolved issues and things that are difficult sometimes to verbalize or process. In my world, where it kind of merges together my clinical practice and sort of my business or my forensic practice, we show up with our histories to events. And I work a lot with like blended families or companies, that are kind of coming together and working together on a project, but they each have their own approaches and styles to doing things. But when it comes around, like say holidays, people have traditions that they expect to happen or anticipate happening. In my world, I end up speaking quite a bit with folks at trying to make sure that their expectations are realistic and staying more grounded in the here and now. I also usually kind of give them some ground rules about topics to maybe avoid at family gatherings. And I don't even know if it's too hot button of an issue to just not even bring up now. But here in the US, I'm sure it's really politically calm everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
But here in the US, there's some heated debates taking place. And interestingly enough, there's a trend that had been happening starting around this time of year, maybe through big parts of December, where people choose to step away, say, from like social media, to take a step away from that to kind of reduce some potential, conflict management. But are there certain, aspects? I know we have a lot of folks in here that are currently in the New Zealand, area. You mentioned, Mark, the recession concerns that's sort of global in your area. Are there other issues that are maybe more either history or maybe more systemic that could be playing out and impacting how people handle conflict, or maybe perhaps putting them more at risk for being on edge?
Yeah, I think so, Vicky. I'm mindful here, probably similar to the diversity, inclusion, and equity challenges over in the US. We have an indigenous culture, Maori here, who have been for many years, essentially the Europeans took over New Zealand. And so there's still some guilt, shame, all sorts of stuff that's associated to that historically that's within a couple of generations of folks and still continues to play out. And then the next level, when we talk families and stuff and those high expectations of creating the perfect environment, you've also got far more awareness around neurodiversity that's at play, whether it be dyslexia, autism, some sort of neurodiverse aspect that then means that the behaviors are quite different from what you might normally expect anyway. Any heightened social gathering is going to create more of a fight-flight response. So I'm not sure we're going to go into that avenue, but it does create another dynamic in the conversation that's pretty challenging on top of the normal, neurospicy combined with normal family dynamics and expectations can make things pretty tough. And people are more aware of it, but still don't quite know how to navigate those things. So there's a couple of quite different trends that I'm bringing in there.
Yeah,
so perhaps we kind of switch mode and start talking about, we have a wealth of wisdom here. How do you navigate the season with your sanity more or less intact and with some humanity? I'm sure you all have examples. We're really keen to hear about that. How do you manage it?
Yeah, I can speak to at least my perspective on that. I think what we're talking about is kind of a combination of two kind of fundamental human components. One is humans naturally seek a more positively intense experiences. We're always looking for that. So, for instance, food is good. Spicy food that you like is even better. A car is good. A luxury car is even better. Shelter's good, but a luxury shelter is even better. So we're trying to maximize this intensity of our experiences in a positive way. And we naturally want to do that with anything really that we're after. And sometimes we might use external things to help us with that. So it could be alcohol, could be other things but it's all seeking the same thing. It's all trying to enhance that intensity of experience in a positive way.
Mhm.
And you have that coupled with sort of our own expectations about how that would go and how it should be. And so you have, for instance, in the holidays, I would like to have this holiday to be a very intensely positive experience. That's what I'm desiring. And then I have that then feeds into my expectations, and that then sets up the dynamic where a lot of people are stressed out because they're actively seeking this, and maybe their history is such that they know that they're not going to get it, which kind of makes it even worse. And they're coming into this. So your question was, how do I personally sort of manage that? To me, being aware of my own expectations is going to be a major component of that. What are my expectations, and what is it that I'm seeking to maximize? What emotion or experience am I trying to maximize, and is it reasonable to do that in this particular venue? And then the second piece is, how can I make that happen for somebody else? If it's not going to happen for me in that environment, how can I help somebody else have that experience? Because it's not always going to be about me. Sometimes it's going to be, I'm just a participant maybe, but I can certainly lean in to help other people have those experiences. And in doing that, it kind of makes me happy that I was able to contribute, even if the experience wasn't necessarily sort of as magical as I would have wanted it to be. I can make it potentially for somebody else. And that seems to help me manage through this. And I've, navigated a lot of dumpster fires in my life. And this is sort of how I sort of plow my way through that. I'd be interested in other thoughts.
Mm-hmm. We had a couple of good comments in the chat. One, a daily reflection practice works for Adikita. She does it during her morning walk. And trying to sounds like that kind of grounding, mindfulness kind of thing that we might teach in the mental health world. And then Helen brought up, like, we have to watch how much media and advertising kind of forces sort of consumerism and the pretty and the sparkles. This time of year, I used to, at least, going into malls. I don't know that even indoor malls exist much anymore. But there's almost like stimulation fatigue, just so many sparkles, so much stuff everywhere, that you get sort of inundated and can become overwhelmed. So that sort of awareness of what drains you and what fills your batteries, right? And so the importance, I think, that was brought up was the connection to people.
I just saw Andy turn on his mic.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand in this situation, but just a few thoughts on that whole on everything we've been talking about. I think that whole unresolved issues thing, in my experience with people, with families or with workplaces, it never really goes away. And I don't think that, and I think that's one of the parts where, Deepika said that they're sometimes difficult to verbalize, but in some ways they need to be resolved if you want to have a sincere relationship with somebody or connection with somebody. The other thing I was thinking when Nick was talking about the fact that you never really know anybody's internal or their world or what's happening in there is then perhaps we have to start from a place of, I don't know what this person's world is like, but I can imagine they have a rich world where there's a lot going on. And so my approach to them or to our interaction has that in mind. And I think then that is an expectation that is possible, because yes, we cannot know everything about them, but we could start from a place of that sort of understanding. And then last thing that is interesting, David, you're talking about how we seek that sort of positive experience. And I'm wondering if that's, like I say, just the only way that we perceive the world in a sense, or more recently, this is how people are because we're more consumerist or more whereas maybe there's other ways of looking or going, for instance, meaning, right? Which does not always lead to positive sort of experiences in terms of things or to do and stuff, but gives us a different sort of approach to life. Yeah.
Great points. Yes.
Vidya, you've got your hand up.
Yes. All of you sharing your reflections, and I have most of my career, I have worked as an external independent investigator coming into workplaces and looking into issues when they have already, exploded and mostly out of control. So what I have observed, and especially what I try to practice is that it always helps to avoid moral injury, because when we try to connect in workplaces and try to interact, and as in some of the episodes of the podcast, creating disruptive, I mean, it's an inevitable that you have disruptive work environments. Sometimes you in the podcast it is featured as a positive thing to have conflict at certain times, but while doing so, it's very important that we keep in mind that people are not receiving a moral injury. So that is something.
What's moral injury, Vidya?
They feel they are. How should I put this? They are unfairly treated, or their voices are not heard, especially in a team. I was thinking about, when the managers or the leaders set the tone in a particular team and builds a certain culture. The objective is to bring everyone together in a harmonized environment, but it may not be possible because people have different challenges and different things. As Nick pointed out, one of his co-workers had these significant challenges which could have prevented, and knowingly or unknowingly, it can result in a moral injury for the person, which they cannot, bring it out in the open in a team or in a shared practice. So if I don't know how it is possible, but to always think in a way that there could be challenges which are unknown to us, and there could be issues that people are tackling without being vocal about it. So that is something I always think about.
Yeah, I think that's similar to what Andy said before and what Vicky said before. Is sort of before jumping to judgment, perhaps give that space to say there could be another possibility, type of thing. Yeah. Nick, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I like where people have gone with this, but I want to come back to this Heisenberg's principle, this uncertainty level. We're dealing with human beings and we're dealing with human circumstances, and I think we get a long way with humility and modesty. In terms of what we can do, one of the new facts, or one of the facts I've gotten over the last couple of years from Vicky that has stuck with me and I've used over and over, is that couples that have been together for a really long time, I forget the number of years, we don't need to be specific, but let's say couples with 10 or more years of experience living and being together are 90 or 95% accurate reading their partner's mood or emotions. I know he's angry, he's frustrated, he's confused, he's whatever. They're less than 50% accurate in diagnosing the reason. So they think they know, but they're wrong. And that's even people who know each other really, really well.
6 months.
Obviously,
research said 6 months or more.
Okay.
You're good at predicting that. Yeah. It's a short period of time.
But that's right. So so that means even people, my wife and I are married 43 years. She can read my mind, by the way. She's told me that, and I'm not going to get to a heated discussion about it. Your facts be damned, right, Vicky? You know Els. But if that's true, and I accept it as true, that again, it puts limits on what we can do. I think consultants have done a lot of damage in the world with a lot of their BS about culture and underlying beliefs and all ethos and ethical system and all this other carp. One of the joys of working with Vicki is I'm working with a professional psychologist who actually knows something about these things, as opposed to some knucklehead with an MBA who thinks he knows something about these things and puts them down.
Ouch.
Puts them down on the PowerPoint chart that he thinks. I have an MBA. I even, yeah, well, I won't go there. But it's first of all, number one, modesty or modesty and humility is recognize we're going to make mistakes. How do we deal with that? And number two, I just throw in anthropology, which is look at how people behave. Stop trying to tell me what his belief system is. Oh, he's MAGA, or he's a pro-UN guy, or he's a this. As soon as you label someone, you have stopped thinking. As I had a very good description of ideology once. An ideology is an easy answer to every question.
I think you said something very important, which is our shortcuts. One of our shortcuts is labeling. And if we can avoid that in high stress situations, somehow that would go a long way in, if nothing else, at least lowering the tension. And I would dearly love to hear from people who haven't spoken yet, if they're comfortable. But I also would like to just check on the topic of expectation management. What I have generally heard is that we kind of need to head into the holiday season with reasonably dampened expectations and not buy into the whole Hollywood, Bollywood, and any other wood generated idea of this ideal family gathering. That's one thing that I am picking up. But yeah, over to others if they would like to speak up. Otherwise, we can continue our conversation.
I just want to say, maybe it's not that we have to dampen anything. Maybe it's just the idea that how do you know what you want is really the best thing that can come out of it, you know? And it's not about dampening the season with that. It's just being open to other possibilities.
I like that.
I like that. And it merges with something that Helen put in the chat, sort of talking about the idea of team resiliency and that having different people with different opinions. That's kind of what we talked about in our podcast. Having perfect alignment all the time usually doesn't lead to new ideas or innovation. And so how do you respectfully, share differences of opinion, or respectfully hear and listen to other people's differences of opinion, so that we don't create the moral injuries, or other things, and watching sort of labeling and being, dismissive, of people for having differences of it. But an earlier comment too is about the idea of, do what you enjoy, make sure you're doing things that involve recharging yourself, during these times. I think that part's super important, self-care management. And no, I don't know that we have to dampen. I think you bring up a good point, Andy. I don't know that we have to dampen our expectations, but make sure in my world, when I'm having someone with a disagreement, either a couple with each other, or they're coming and telling me an individual session about the disagreement, I ask them to kind of spell out, tell me what you were expecting. What was, tell me what your expectation was. And I have them do that because more often than not, as they start to describe what their expectation was, they start to hear how it's unrealistic. They can start to hear how, well, maybe not, but this is what I was hoping for, or that's what I was expecting. And that's okay, right? Going into it, the idea of asking, your kids, what are part of the holidays or the traditions that you really enjoy? What's important to you? And I got to tell you, it has surprised me more often than not to some of the other points that were brought up. I think, Mark, this was one of your comments. I've got at least one of my kiddos is I want downtime alone in my room. And I really want that when everybody's at the house. And I'm like, and I get that they need that. But if that keeps that kiddo from having a meltdown or, pushing other people's buttons and helps them have a positive experience, back to your point, David, the idea, if I can't bring that sense of joy strictly to myself, can I bring it to others? That is something that when I'm doing grief work this time of year, I do quite a bit of grief work. People return. They have this expectation of the holiday time brings up a lot of nostalgia and history. And for some people, that also comes with grief. Some of the things that I have found to be the most profound importance when people are at the depths of their grief is doing for others, helping someone else, having them volunteer turns out, and they look at me usually like I've grown a second head. They're like, I'm not like bathing right now. I'm having a hard time brushing my teeth. I can't get out the door, but you want me to go work at the soup kitchen, or to go help out, at the food pantry? And I'm like, if you can, yeah, I do. And I have yet to have anybody come back and tell me that that was a horrible idea.
And that's all about perspectives, isn't it? Because you shut in your own world, and you can amplify what's happening to something that is not real. And as soon as you step out of it, you get other perspectives, and you can regulate it.
And you're connecting with other people. That was an earlier point that was brought up, right? Connecting and rejoining humanity, I think is helpful. Yeah,
on a practical level, I think the self-care comment, going on walks, eating, those are all important. I've also found eating quite useful when you want to suppress comments, particularly in a social setting.
When you grab your water bottle.
Yeah, and drink or eat.
Wait, do you mean like when you don't want to say something, you stuff a Christmas pie in your mouth? Okay.
No, in his mouth, Andy.
In his mouth.
Because it's conflict if you shove it in their mouth. But if you,
well, it's charity at the same time, right? If you do that.
Do it a favor.
But thinking about self-care and thinking about managing your own emotions and expectations, do folks have other suggestions or ideas, whether that's at the workplace or at home, other things that they have found to be helpful, or things they avoid? Maybe it's things they avoid.
Deepika says breath work works as well. And Stephen Covey's quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space, there's the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. Nice words.
But and I think, though, let's be clear here. It's personal. So we each need to have thought through what works for each one of us. Because I'm a yoga aficionado. I've done yoga for over a decade. That is one of my places where I can tune out. I've recommended hot yoga to many people. One of a dozen or more, have tried it and actually liked it. And the rest of them are like, you're nuts. So again, I think each of us needs to find what works for us, number one. Number two, to Vicky's point about doing something, I was told years ago that if you're feeling sorry for yourself, look for someone you can do something for. That's a simple heuristic. If you, again, accept humility and modesty, each one of us should have, because you're not going to figure it out in the moment. And you're not going to pull out a menu to figure it out from. You kind of need to know what works for me. And so there needs to be some interior self-awareness about, I need to do this.
And perhaps some grace when you're observing other people who aren't doing that or don't have that kind of self-awareness, and are experiencing a certain degree of stress. So, fearlessly being human in our approach and recognizing that the people we're interacting with and work with or care about and love in our families and extended families, recognizing that humans make mistakes, that we have flaws, but if there's an effort to try to understand and to help and to resolve, to your points that were brought up earlier, if there's a way to reach a point of resolution, even if it's something more like, I disagree with your opinion, but I respect you as a person. I disagree with a coworker, perhaps about an approach that they're taking, but we work for the same team. And sometimes that's about perspective and conversations if you can have them. And so those are things that I want us to think about as we kind of go into the end of the year. Kavita, do you have other thoughts that you want to make sure we get as takeaways?
Yeah, I do think that often what happens is you get into a complex situation and then you won't like it. And that's, again, human. We don't like to be in conflict. We kind of want to connect and want to be pleasant. But it's okay to be in conflict. And it's a little bit, if you can think about it like a release of energy. And I've said this often in the podcast. In my household, we kind of let out steam. And part of that is being in conflict. And once we've had our say, each of us, we then have better relationship because it's out there. And if there is hurt, there is permission for it to come out. It's better out than in is something that I think works for me. But it may not work for everyone else. And I take Vidya's point about, you don't want to end up harming another individual. But at the same time, I think carrying some kind of a guilt is also not okay. So if we can switch from guilt mode to doing something about it, generosity or a simple sorry or stuffing your mouth, whatever works. I think
I'm going to think of that now. At every dinner, I'm going to be looking around who's shoving food in their mouth to make sure they don't talk. But I think it, Kavita, you bring up a great point. It kind of leads into sort of our second season, which we're going to be focusing on is feedback. Receiving it and kind of giving it and processing. What do you want to do with it? How do you take it? And even at the end, we're going to talk about how do you gracefully take a compliment, the positive feedback. But I think about when it comes to like Stephen Covey's, quote that Deepika put in there, that makes a lot of sense, because what we're talking about is how do you respond, and to be thoughtful and intentional in both providing and listening and hearing and interaction. And I think that's really kind of the theme that we've talked about, is to try to think of these things in ways of being graceful and accepting that other people may be at a very different place than you, and not making assumptions with those negative filters and those cognitive distortions that you've heard me drone on about now for a while. But it's about being mindful, of where people are at. And in my world, we spend a lot of time in the clinical realm, sort of teaching people how to meet people with where they're at and not expecting them to be where you are. And that goes to the diversity issues, the neurospicy, my favorite term of all time, concept that so many of us have in one form or another, and recognizing that, or the struggles that people have that we don't know about. How many of the struggles that people have are invisible to the sight, to the eye, and that we're all just trying to figure it out.
I'm just conscious of the time, and I want to kind of leave the floor open. And what I'm going to do is a little bit of a game. One word about your either advice or your secret weapon, or what you're going to do in terms of the topic of conflict. It's just one word. And I'll start with people on the screen. I'm just going to call them out. Terry. Okay, one phrase.
One word, listen.
Ooh, terrific. Vidya.
I would suggest you always use or maybe to think of an altered scenario.
Andy.
I had listen as well, but yeah, sorry. Terry.
Nick.
Humility.
David.
Acceptance.
Mark.
Explore with curiosity.
Helen.
I have no word. Silence.
Ooh, beautiful. Jake?
Curiosity was my first one. So my second one is good intent. Assume good intent.
My word would be courage.
Courage. Okay.
And mine would be keep calm and carry on. But I also like the idea of the taking a sip of water.
Yep, I like it. Good stuff. Thank you, guys. I really have enjoyed this journey that we've been on both tonight and then over the course of these last few months filming, and open to feedback and ideas. I like the idea of having some live interaction. This feels very different than just a couple of us talking. So I like the idea of this. So maybe if you guys have some suggestions of some topics or some other ideas you might want us to try and host, and folks that you might want to invite along, I think that's a great idea. You should have our contact information if you'd like it. Any final words? Anything else, Kavita? Did you give your word? I don't think you gave your one word.
Oh, neither did you.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's okay.
Mine's breathe.
Breathe. Okay. I was going to say stay curious, like Curious George. Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your evening or day.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for coming.
You made this so worthwhile.